Antonio Rossi has carried the brass compass since 1944, when he served as an infantry reconnaissance point man with the United States Army at Monte Cassino. Now 82 years old, he keeps it in his breast pocket while working in the vegetable garden behind his house. A sharp clang of metal striking stone makes him drop the iron shovel and flatten his back against the damp earthen slope. His right hand snaps to the compass as cracked glass grinds against his ribs. Rossi lies motionless among half-turned rows of soil. A deep crack runs across the compass glass. The needle inside trembles with each short breath he takes. He pushes himself up, brushes mud from his knees, and pulls out the compass to align wooden stakes for tomato plants. He taps the brass casing with his thumb. The needle stays jammed, fixed toward the gray stone wall instead of north. Rossi freezes with the compass suspended in his hand. He covers the face with his palm. A truck backfires on the distant road. Rossi drops to one knee and presses the compass hard against his left chest. His fingers tighten around the cold metal. A jagged shard of glass cuts into his palm. Blood beads along his knuckles and smears across the cracked dial. Rossi does not react to the pain. He adjusts his grip, shielding the compass instead. The pressure pulls him back to a reconnaissance advance at Monte Cassino. Fog, rock, and the weight of leading the squad return in fragments. February 1944 at Monte Cassino. Antonio Rossi, age 21, holds the position of point man for a reconnaissance squad of the United States Army. His mission is to lead the team across a steep rocky ridge to accurately identify the positions of German MG-42 machine gun nests sealing off the valley. Rossi parts the fog-soaked brush and scans the fractured rock gaps ahead. Sergeant Harold Miller follows 10 meters behind Rossi, keeping his weapon low and watching the hand signals of the point man. Rossi pulls the brass military compass from his breast pocket and flips it open to check the direction of movement against the gray cliff faces. Jagged gray rocks and slick moss under his boots force Rossi to shift his weight onto his toes to maintain balance. A faint metallic tap from the upper slope produces a chain of clicking echoes in the fog-choked air. Sergeant Harold Miller crawls tight against the base of a large rock to Rossi's left and angles his weapon toward the tree line above. Thick fog blocks all visibility beyond 5 meters along the steep stone incline. Rossi lowers his body and uses a dry branch to probe the leaf-covered ground just ahead of his leather boots. Strong wind cuts across the mountainside, driving dry brush into one another and producing continuous rustling sounds. Rossi stops before a shallow circular depression in the ground directly beneath his intended next step. He drops his right knee onto the rock and brushes away damp soil with his fingertips, exposing the metal igniter of a German S-mine. Bounding mine. Rossi raises his left arm high with his palm open toward the squad behind him. Sergeant Harold Miller and the soldiers immediately drop flat and hold their positions with weapons trained toward the crest of the slope. Rossi keeps his finger 3 centimeters from the mine's igniter as his upper body weight leans forward. His breath forms white vapor that drifts across the brass casing of the compass in his hand. Heavy footsteps from hobnailed boots sound from above the rocky crest, 10 meters from Rossi's position. Rossi presses his chest into the ground and pulls both elbows tight against his sides to reduce his profile. The compass in his palm brushes against the thick fabric of his jacket, producing a faint scraping sound in the silence. German voices sound clearly from just above the rock ledge where Rossi lies motionless. Rossi locks his jaw and takes short breaths through his nose. Sergeant Harold Miller lies behind him with his index fingers squared on the trigger of his M1 carbine in a ready-to-fire position. A small stone falls from above, strikes Rossi's left shoulder blade, and then tumbles into the ravine below. Rossi keeps his eyes fixed on a crack in the rock directly in front of him. The grind of German hobnailed boots on gravel creates dry, crushing sound pressure directly above his head. The distance between Rossi's chest and the metal detonator remains fixed under the pressure of his body pressed hard into the stone. The weight of his pack bears down on Rossi's spine as he holds every muscle group locked rigid. He presses the compass hard against his left chest with his palm to prevent any vibration of the metal casing. Rossi maintains his position pinned against the mine as the German patrol halts directly above the rock face. As the sound of German footsteps fades beyond the rock ledge, Antonio Rossi lifts his body from the damp ground. Sergeant Harold Miller places one hand on the strap of Rossi's pack and gives a slight push to signal the advance. Rossi slips into a narrow gap between two vertical rock faces, where the passage constricts to barely allow a single fully equipped man through. Both elbows scrape against the rough stone, producing a dry rasp of fabric against rock. Rossi pulls the brass compass from his breast pocket and holds it level to check direction along the confined passage. Sergeant Harold Miller stays tight behind Rossi, keeping one hand on the pointman's belt to maintain physical contact in the dense fog. A stream of cigarette smoke drifts laterally through the rock gap from the direction of the slope above. Already, Rossi halts, tilting his head slightly to capture sound carried by the wind moving through the stone fissures. A metallic click comes from a concealed position behind the gray haze 20 meters ahead. Rossi lowers his center of gravity, pressing his face close to the cold rock wall to scan the exit of the narrow defile. An elongated metal object protrudes from beneath a faded camouflage netting above. Rossi lowers the hand, holding the compass to hip level, and grips the lid tightly. Sergeant Harold Miller shifts his full body weight forward against Rossi's back as the pointman freezes all movement. The pressure from behind pins Rossi into the rock edge, sending small limestone fragments tumbling from beneath his boots into the deep crevice. Rossi looks down at the surface of the path, directly beneath his partially lifted right foot. A faint glint of reflected light flashes from a thin steel wire stretched between two large rock masses. The metal wire, no thicker than a strand of hair, lies 3 centimeters above the ground. Rossi holds the toe of his boot at the minimum distance before making contact with the wire. Light reflects off a gray metal mass aimed directly into the narrow passage through the fog. A dim shadow shifts behind the metal object, blocking the only exit of the rock gap. Sergeant Harold Miller tightens his grip on Rossi's pack strap and maintains steady pressure to lock both men in position. Rossi snaps the brass compass shut, producing a small metallic click inside his lightly trembling palm. The weight of the pack pulls Rossi backward as he is forced to keep his right foot suspended. Wind howls through the rock gap, causing the thin steel wire to vibrate just in front of Rossi's leather boot. Rossi's eyes shift continuously between the position of the wire and the indistinct metal object above. He raises his right hand high with the palm open and fingers locked together, freezing the squad into absolute halt. Antonio Rossi stands motionless, with his right foot suspended directly above the rusted tripwire of the bounding mine. Sergeant Harold Miller grips the strap of Rossi's pack from behind and holds the pointman balanced on the sloped rock edge. A muzzle flash erupts from the MG-42 machine gun concealed behind the fog above. Rossi stares directly into the firing barrel of the machine gun and then glances down at the mine wire beneath his boot sole. Sergeant Harold Miller's foot steps forward to Rossi's heel, applying pressure that drives the entire formation ahead. Rossi clenches his right fist and keeps his raised arm fully extended in front of the squad. He holds his posture upright, chest facing the machine gun, without diving for cover along the narrow rock wall. The German MG-42 opened sustained fire, tearing through the quiet of the rock corridor. 7.92mm rounds slam into the rock face above Rossi's head, blasting white limestone fragments into the air. Rossi presses his left arm tight against his breast pocket, where the brass compass is pinned to his sternum. A massive metallic impact slams directly into Rossi's chest. A sharp clang of metal-on-metal rings out from beneath the heavy field jacket. Rossi's body is thrown backward by the force, crashing into Sergeant Harold Miller's chest. Both infantrymen collapse onto the broken stone ground as enemy fire rakes the space overhead. Rossi lies on his back, mouth open, chest spasming with repeated gasps. His left hand clamps down over the breast pocket holding the military compass. Sharp shards of shattered glass punch through the pocket fabric and bite into Rossi's fingertips. Sergeant Harold Miller crawls over Rossi and drives him down into a dark rock hollow with both hands. A rusted fragment of the bullet embeds deep into the brass casing of the compass. Wedged among broken glass shards, Rossi releases his grip on the pocket, revealing a deep crater dented into the metal cover of the device. The compass glass is pulverized into fine fragments, jammed hard against the needle bent sharply to one side. Rossi draws broken breaths, his chest rising and falling as the shattered glass inside the pocket grinds softly. He raises a hand coated with stone dust and watches blood seep from cuts along his fingers. Rossi extracts the compass from his pocket using 2 trembling fingers. The enemy metal fragment remains lodged in the felt lining of the brass case, resting mere millimeters from Rossi's chest skin. Sergeant Harold Miller presses his ear to Rossi's chest and checks his heartbeat during a brief lull in machine gun fire. Rossi pushes Miller's hand away, eyes locked on the fragment embedded in the cracked compass. He snaps the compass lid shut. But the deformed brass casing prevents the halves from fully aligning. Small glass fragments spill from the pocket onto the gray stone beneath Rossi's back with each movement. The MG-42 begins another burst, rounds detonating across the rock crest behind the improvised cover. Sergeant Harold Miller issues a rapid series of decisive hand signals toward the rear of the rock gap. Rossi grips Miller's shoulder and uses his boot heels to slide backward across the loose stone, away from the direct line of fire. He presses his palm tight over the shattered compass face to keep its components from spilling out. Rossi crawls backward through the narrow trail, eyes fixed on the machine gun barrel still spitting fire through the fog. Blood from the cuts on Rossi's fingers smears across the cooling brass casing. He draws a deep breath, pain flaring in his sternum with each expansion of his lungs. Sergeant Harold Miller restrains Rossi at a protected corner behind a large rock mass outside the firing arc. Rossi buttons his breast pocket shut, locking the shattered compass tight against his left chest. He nods confirmation to Miller and grips the stock of his Thompson submachine gun with hands stained by metal. The bullet fragment lodged in the compass vibrates with each rapid breath Rossi takes beneath the dark stone cover. Antonio Rossi stands in the dark garage and places the compass on a wooden workbench covered in sawdust. He uses a small pair of tweezers to remove each remaining shard of broken glass lodged in the warped brass casing. A tiny fragment of glass drops onto the concrete floor, producing a dry, sharp sound in the quiet space. Rossi immediately presses his palm flat against the dent in the compass casing and holds his breath. The compass needle inside the rotating disc trembles and then locks hard against a black metal fragment still embedded in the felt lining. He nudges the rotating disc with a fingertip, but the sharp edge of the cracked glass slices into his dry skin and draws blood. Rossi presses the injured finger into the cracked glass as fragments begin falling onto the wooden bench. Thomas Rossi, his son standing across the bench, reaches out to take hold of the open compass. Rossi jerks the device back, hides it behind his back, and retreats deeper into the dark corner of the garage. He snaps the brass lid shut, producing a metallic click that fails to seat cleanly due to the distorted casing. The dented lid scrapes against the fabric of his shirt pocket as he forces it back into place against his left chest. A distant roll of thunder sounds on the horizon, and Rossi immediately grips the compass through his shirt. His fingertips press hard into the breastbone, where a faint scar lies directly beneath the compass. Rossi steps into the garden and uses a tape measure to recheck the spacing between the wooden stakes. He opens the compass to confirm direction, but the needle is fixed 30 degrees off toward the stone wall. Rossi grips a wooden stake and drives it hard into the soil, following the false direction of the jammed needle. The line of stakes drifts out of alignment, cutting diagonally across the garden instead of following the straight nylon line. He kneels in the dirt and rubs the cool brass casing with a mud-covered hand. A rusted bullet fragment deep inside the casing scrapes against the glass, producing a high, grating sound. Rossi freezes, keeping his chest at a fixed distance from the sharp edge of the dented casing. He pulls out a strip of clear tape and places it over the cracked glass. The tape obscures the military graduation markings on the compass dial. Rossi removes the nylon cord from his belt and wraps it several times around the brass casing. The pressure from the cord forces the compass lid open, exposing the black metal fragment still wedged inside. He presses the lid shut with his palm until the sound of metal grinding against metal is heard. Rossi stands and scans along the wooden fence, while his hand remains fixed over his breast pocket. An aircraft passes overhead, its low roar rolling down into the garden. Rossi hunches inward, cups both hands around the compass, and rests his chin on his knuckles. The compass disc spins continuously under the vibration of the aircraft engine noise. Rossi buttons his pocket closed and resumes shoveling soil, holding the compass fixed between his chest and the wooden handle. As the sun sets behind the wooden fence, Antonio Rossi sets the shovel down beside the freshly turned soil bed. He removes the brass compass from his breast pocket and wipes the mud from the deformed metal casing with the hem of his shirt. Rossi bends forward and places the compass on top of a wooden stake, marking the corner of the vegetable garden. He rotates the compass disc until the jammed needle trembles and touches the metal fragment embedded in the felt lining. Rossi stretches a nylon cord along the direction indicated by the compass needle, even as the line runs completely off from the edge of the house wall. His trembling hand runs along the cord to check its tension with his rough palm. A cold gust of wind rattles the shattered glass and produces a faint hiss inside the dented brass casing. Rossi immediately straightens his back, brings his heels together, and presses his left arm tight to his side in a familiar stance. He holds the posture while staring directly at the compass dial reflecting the deep red light of dusk. Rossi bends down, collects small limestone fragments fallen from his pocket, and arranges them in a circle around the base of the wooden stake. He snaps the compass lid shut, the impact of the lodged bullet fragment ringing clearly across the garden. Rossi raises the compass to his lips, blows dust from the brass casing, and presses it directly against his left breastbone. He slides the compass back into his breast pocket and carefully buttons each shirt button from bottom to top. A distant bell tolls, and Rossi turns to face the direction toward which the compass needle habitually locks. He stands motionless in the crooked garden, his right hand pressed over the compass as darkness settles across the ground. Rossi picks up the shovel and walks in a straight line through the unfinished garden rows toward the house.